Okay, hi. So in this quick video, we're gonna go over using bounce reflectors to improve your lighting for your photography. So we're using this fancy foam core. This is just a piece of, it's basically white board with a white cover, and you can use it to bounce light back into your shot to fill in the shadows. That's basically what we're doing. The other thing we're gonna use, and these are cheap. These are like $5 at like Michael's and places like that, maybe $10. This is a little bit more money, but not much. This is a collapsible reflector. So it folds up like this, and then you can unfold it, and it has a black side and a silver side, but also you can take the cover off, if I can find the zipper. Here's the zipper. And you have a bunch of different other ways you can use it. So this is diffusion. This lets light through it. It's not really a reflector, or it can be a reflector, but it's also gonna let light go straight through it, and you'll see how that works in a minute. Also on the inside, you have two other surfaces you can use. You can use a white surface to bounce white light back. You can use a gold one to give it kind of that golden hour kind of look. It reflects back kind of a golden warm color if you want to warm up your image. So we have 4 different surfaces we can use. Some of them will have even more, where they will mix gold and silver together, or white and gold to make it less gold, but also white. So different colors for different effects that you want to do. So that's what we're going to do. So let's get started. Okay, so this first shot, you can see that the lighting is not that great. She's kind of squinting a little bit. She's looking directly in the sun. There's harsh shadows. So we're just using that one as an example of how you can probably don't want to have people face directly into the sun. All right, so here you can see how there's some harsh shadows on one side of her face. There's some bright areas on the other side of the face. Not super flattering. She's kind of squinting a little bit, and she's really mad at her dad for making her do this. All right, so on this one, you can see that we have this, we're just using it as to block the sun. So she's pretty much now in shade from that reflector. So this is one way you can use these. You can see she's obviously quite a bit darker, but now it is, it's a nice even light, and she's not squinting. You might have to use a little bit of exposure compensation maybe. I'll just throw another one in there just in case. All right, so you can see in this image that the light is quite a bit softer. It's more diffuse because it's kind of coming from the sky around instead of the direct sunlight. That does make it a little bit darker. So I did need to use some exposure compensation for this one. Also watch out, you see I have a little bit of light area down there in the bottom left. Where the overhead was not covering her, so watch out for that. You either have to make sure that it covers all the area you want or crop it out. Also notice that the background is a little bit overexposed now, but that's okay because we care about the subject more than the background in this one. On a positive note, now she's not quite so annoyed with me. All right, so this time we've taken the cover off, and now it's working as diffusion. So the sun is coming through the diffuser up here. Joanne is holding for me. Thank you, Joanne. And now she's brighter. Haven is brighter, but it's letting through a little bit more light, but it's still diffusing a little bit softer. She thinks it's a little bit bright, so it's still making her squint just a little bit, but try not to squint there, Haven. All right, good. All right, so you can see in this image we're getting a little bit less diffuse light than we did from the solid overhead, but we are getting a softening of the light, which is diffusion, right? And we are getting some shadows on one side of her face. I could have turned her more towards the sun a little bit and get more straight ahead light on her face, and that would have gotten rid of some of those shadows on one side. It does have a specular highlight. If you look in her eyes, you'll see a little spots in her eyes. Those are called specular highlights, and basically that's the reflector, which we didn't have in the previous shot. And they're good to have these little specular highlights because they can make the eyes seem more alive. If there's no reflections in the eyes at all, no little sparkle, then they can seem kind of dead, like she's a zombie kid or something. So yeah, so think about using the diffuser function of the collapsible reflector to get that effect. Okay, in this shot we've got kind of side lighting where there's a highlight on one side of her face and then the other side is in shadow. But we can add in a reflector to make that look a little bit better. Okay, so here's the same shot again with the reflector. We're bouncing from the light, sun's coming from my right, and then we're bouncing back from the left to fill in the shadow. So it's called fill light, or fill, using the reflector to fill. Haven, turn towards Joanne just a little bit. Look up though, look up here. Look right here. Turn back towards me a little bit. And a little bit more this way. Point your chin right here. There you go. Good job. Okay, now right there. So take that light out, Joanne. Just go ahead and pull it all the way out. And then here's the same thing without it. All right, so taking a quick look at these, I've got kind of a funky lighting on one side of her face on this first image on the left. I probably should have turned her a little more away from the sun. I did that on the second one. Still getting a little bit of a bright shadow or bright light on her nose there, but you can see how the bounce is filling in the other side of her face a little bit, kind of brightening it up a little bit. I could have brought in the bounce even a bit more to balance the light a little bit more. The closer that bounce gets, the brighter it's going to be, and it's going to get closer to the amount of light that's coming on the bright side of her face, which is the other side. You can see on the one on the right, that's without any bounce, and it's just a little bit higher ratio. So it's called the lighting ratio, the ratio between the light side or the bright side and the dark side of the face. So just bring that bounce in and out, and then get the amount of light that you want to kind of balance that light a little bit. And I wasn't spending a ton of time as far as hair, obviously, and positioning, but yeah, I should have probably turned her a little bit more away from that light, but I think you get the idea on that one. Okay, so this shot is just the shot with backlighting. So she's lit from behind, the sun's up here, obviously. There's no fill or anything, just gonna see what that looks like. I've got a little bit of plus exposure compensation going on this one. I'm gonna try to shade my lens a little bit. And that's what that one looks like. So now we're gonna add in the reflector. All right, so on this one we're adding in this foam core bounce, just a piece of white foam core, about $5 or something like that. So we're looking at the sun. We're gonna take the sun from here, bounce off of here, go back in here and fill in this side with the reflector. And this side's gonna be a little more in shadows, but now we're gonna even out the light a little bit. She's getting lit from behind, which has this nice highlight on her hair, rim light, but then we're gonna fill in from this side. So anytime you're filling in shadows, it's called fill. So let's go ahead and take a shot at this one. And if you come in a little bit, Joanne, and turn more, so you want to look at where the light is actually hitting. That's probably good right there. And I'm going to shoot right past the edge of that board. So look back here, Haven. Chin up and look right about here. And look happy. Can you look right at the camera? There you go. And one more. Can you smile a little bit? All right, good. All right, so taking a quick look at some images from those two setups. This is without any fill. This is just backlit from and then lit from the sky. So you can see it's a little bit flat. If you zoom in on her eyes, right, you don't see any highlights in there. But it's a nice kind of even light. It's got light from the sky that's more diffuse than direct sunlight. You may need to use some plus exposure compensation in that situation. I think we've mentioned that before. So in these two, there was the board that was used to bounce light back in from the shadow side. So if you look in her eyes, and that's a good little trick to remember, is you can look in the eyes of a subject, especially on like even in magazine shoots and things like that, fashion, you can see where the lights are. So here's the board. If I zoom way in, you can kind of see the board in her eye there. You can see it also right there. So that's the light coming from the board, and you can see that there's a little more definition of the light. It's not quite so flat. There's a little bit of a shadow down here on the far side and a highlight on this side, but it's still pretty pleasing and a pretty soft light, because really what you're thinking about is the relative size of the light. The sun, even though it's big, is a small light source relative to the subject, right? Because it's so far away, right? But this board is pretty big relative to her because it's pretty close. So it's a much larger light source. The larger the light source, the more diffuse and sort of wrap around the light's going to be, and often it's going to be more pleasing depending on if you want, more drama with more contrast or less, kind of a softer, more wraparound light. All right, so in this setup, she's just in open shade this time, no fill or anything. So open shade is really good because she's basically being lit by the sky up on this side with no direct sunlight, which causes kind of can cause harsh shadows. So let's just take one here, and another one just like that. Good. So now we're going to add in a reflector. As before, we're going to bounce from outside the shade this time, though. All right, so this time we've added in the bounce again. So we have the foam core up here. You could use the reflector as well, but the foam core works just as well if you're just using the white side. So again, we're taking the light from the sun up here. She's in the open shade though, so she won't have that rim light, but we don't have to worry about all the other stuff in the background. The background's gonna go dark because it's in the deep shadow, right? And then we're gonna get the light bouncing off here and then coming back and lighting this side of her face. Okay, put your chin just this way, Haven. Look back at me. Try to look a little bit happy. And one more just like that, say pickles. No pickles? Okay, good. I'm gonna shoot one more with just a little bit of plus exposure compensation. Okay, ready? Good. All right, so we're taking a quick look at the images with bounce and without bounce into open shade. So these are open shade here on the left. If I zoom in a little bit, you can see that it's a nice kind of soft light. Again, it's open light from the sky, but it doesn't have a lot of drama to it. There's not a lot of highlights in the eyes. The lighting is very even, but which is usually pretty good. But it's fine, it's good if that's what you want. Here's another one the same way. But then we add the bounce in. So now you've got the bounce, you've got a little bit more dimension to it, right? You've got like this highlight a little bit brighter on this side. The bounce board was up on the upper right, above her head and to the right, or camera right, and to her left. And then you've got a little bit darker over here. So it's a little bit more dimension if you look at those two together. And a little bit more drama maybe, a little bit more contrast. So definitely a different look. So if that's what you want, you can think about using the bounce that way. Here's another one, and here's another one. These all have the bounce. So if you look at this one, it's got kind of a nice light, probably the better of those images. Generally, you would shoot a lot more images than I'm shooting for the videos, right? Because I'm trying to get them in the video. But you would shoot a lot more, so you have a better chance of getting a good image. But this one looks a little bit better. And you've got, again, the light from the bounce on this side and the shadow on this side. And if I zoom in on her eye again, you can kind of see where the reflection is. There's the bounce right there in her eye, and you can tell where that was, and creating that sort of nice but directed light. And you're kind of controlling it too. You could put it on the other side if you want, either side, whatever you want to do in that way. So there it is, using a bounce into open shade. All right, so now we've added in this foam core again, but this time it's going to be bouncing right underneath her. You can even have the subject kind of hold it a little bit. It's just going to fill in a little bit this way, just to give a little bit of light. Not much, but you should be able to see the difference a little bit. And one more. Good. All right, so now we're looking quickly at two images. This is no bounce again, and this one was with the bounce underneath. So the bounce underneath, you can see it has a little bit of a look to it. It's kind of filling in a little bit of light, kind of getting underneath her hair a little bit more. It's not a huge difference, but it is a slight difference. So that's another thing you can do, is to place that bounce board right underneath the subjects, sort of around their midriff there, and then it bounces a little bit of light back up into their face and makes that face kind of pop a little bit more. You can see a slight difference, but it's not a huge difference. But depending on where you put the board, if you put the board closer, you're going to get more underlight. You don't want to have too much underlight, because then it starts to look a little bit like a horror movie. When you think about old-time horror movies, they lit people from underneath, because it's not a natural light direction, and it does make people look strange if it's overly done. So just be careful if you use that technique with the board underneath the subject. All right, so this time we've left her just where she was, but this time we're using the gold side of the reflector, so this will warm up the light and actually throw a lot more in, so she'll be a lot brighter for this one. The background will probably go darker. You could also use silver for this if you want it to be more cool. It's basically like a mirror, so it can be kind of bright. Can you bring that up just a little bit, Joanne? And she might squint a little bit. Let's move over this way just a little bit, Joanne. Move to the right, so you're not quite directly from camera position. There you go. All right. Looking right here, say squishy. Squishy. Good. Okay. All right, so here's a quick look at two different bounces. So here's the one on the left, is the one that we bounced in with the white foam core or foam board. And then here's the one with the gold reflector. So the gold reflector is going to put out a lot more light. It's going to be brighter. Even though this looks darker, I think the exposure was different. The background looks darker, probably because this light is really making her bright. So relative to the background, the exposure is a little bit darker, so you might see the background get a little bit darker depending on where you are if you're bouncing into the shade. A lot of times these gold reflectors are used in the sun too to bounce back in and get that rim light like we got earlier. So you can use them, and they may work actually better, the gold and silver reflectors, when you're out in the sun versus in the shade, but it depends on the situation. But you can see more dramatic lighting, right? Pretty bright. She was squinting in the first one. But you can see that highlight in her eye from that gold reflector, definitely a specular highlight there. A little stronger contrast, a little more drama than this one, and it has that little bit of a gold tone to it as well, so warms up the image a little bit. All right, this one I just wanted to show you real quick because you can use natural buildings and things, any reflective surface. So here's like this garage that's being hit by direct sunlight and it's bouncing back in towards her, and you can actually see it in her eyes probably where the reflections are. Another trick that photographers do is they'll put their hand up like this and kind of look at the light. Which way is it coming from? And I can tell that it's coming from a little bit over here. If I shade the wall with my hand, you can also see a little bit of a shadow there. So we're going to use this as a reflector, and that way we don't have to pay that person to hold up our reflector for us. So, all right, here we go, Haven, looking right here, say smiling. No smiling. All right, good job. All right, taking a look at the last two, I think. So this is one where you're just bouncing off the wall. So if you look in the reflection in her eyes, you can kind of see that building reflecting on her eyes there. So we're using that surface, it's pretty bright, right? It's being hit by the sun as a bounce, a natural bounce. So we're getting light from this direction, brighter on this side, darker on this side like we saw before. Here's another one that I shot earlier. So this one is open shade. She's kind of in the shade here, but you've got the side of this building here, and there's actually a bunch of stuff in the foreground that you can't see in back of the camera that's also being hit by the sun up here. And it's creating this pretty nice light on her face. And you can see if you look in her eyes, remember that's the trick you use, you can see this bright reflections in her eyes a little bit from underneath a little bit. So you are getting quite a bit of underlighting there. But it does end up with being a nice light, and you don't have to have anybody hold the reflector or anything. So look around for buildings, and if they're white, they don't have to be white actually, but look around for surfaces that are reflecting light, and if you can use those to bounce light back into the shade, and sometimes you can get a really nice light that way. So I think that's it. So hopefully that helps a little bit with using bounce to control light a little bit and improve your portrait lighting.